Merry Christmas and welcome back to Taylor Time Live. I'm your host, Seth Gladden, and today we're going to be discussing one of the biggest challenges facing our industry, which is the labor shortage. But more importantly, how you can be a part of the solution. In fact, just by joining today, you already are part of the solution, because at Taylor we're donating $20 per viewer to the Floor Covering Education Foundation. So thank you for being here. Today we've broken our topic into four parts. So first we're going to talk a little bit about who the Floor Covering Education Foundation is, then look at how we're going to recruit, train, and retain installers. So joining me today in studio is Scott Humphrey, President and CEO of the World Floor Covering Association. Scott, thank you for being here.
Good to be with you.
Do you mind telling us just a little bit about who the WFCA is?
No, sure. The WFCA is an organization. Our purpose statement says we exist to ensure the success and profitability of professional flooring dealers and to represent their common interest. And thus the reason this topic is so important to us, because nothing is impacting the success of professional flooring dealers more than the lack of skilled labor.
Yeah, and that's a great mission for sure. We'll come back to you in a moment and talk about who the Education Foundation is. But before we do, also joining us today is Robert Varden with CFI. Robert, thank you for being here.
Thank you, Seth. It's a pleasure always to be on this program, especially with such great guys like Geoff and Scott. Jeez.
Absolutely. Yeah, I know. I'm honored for sure. So, Robert, do you mind just telling us a little bit about CFI?
Well, CFI basically, we're a 27-year-old association, started out just looking at training and certifying. Obviously, 5-6 years ago, when we realized that the bodies that we were training and certifying were getting older and older and older, and we weren't seeing any of the youth coming into the industry. So we knew we had to reach out, some 5-6 years ago, start building brick and mortar schools, start looking hard at the recruitment piece. That's why, again, I think this segment you're doing this month is phenomenal, Seth. I really do.
Yeah, well, thank you. And definitely the role that you play is extremely important with the training aspect. Honestly, probably all three aspects. So, and last but definitely not least, we have Geoff Gordon with Fuse. Geoff, thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely, we're honored for sure. Would you mind, Geoff, just telling us a little bit about Fuse and who you guys are?
Can I have about 20 minutes?
Sure, you can have about 2.
Oh, come on. We're basically an alliance of flooring contractors. We've had, I think, one of our best years ever in terms of the camaraderie and the coming together in a very tough time with the pandemic. But basically, as a group, we're best practices. We share those best practices among the members. And, through a turbulent time like this, it's been so gratifying to see our members share ideas, whether it was how to get their company through, a little bit of a decline in sales, or to deal with COVID on the job site or in the office or whatever. So, we're basically here to support our contractor members and also our suppliers. We have a tremendous group of suppliers that we're aligned with that we're very grateful to have on board.
Yeah, and definitely an important role that you guys play for sure as well. And before we jump into all of that, though, I would love to learn a little bit about the Floor Covering Education Foundation. So I think most of us have probably heard that term, but Scott, do you mind just kind of give us a background on that and a little bit of information about it?
Happy to, Seth, and you may have to stop me because it's something I'm very passionate about. In fact, almost a year ago to the day, we had the revealing of the Floor Covering Education Foundation at a hotel in Chattanooga, Tennessee, where we laid out this vision. And this all stemmed, really, there's a couple of origin points for this. One of them is the fact that if you look back over the last 50 years, the challenge that has impacted success in the flooring industry more than anything else is the lack of skilled labor. Sometimes it would be 1, sometimes it would be 2 in the rankings, but it was always up there impacting the opportunity for success. And it's really what got me linked to Robert. Robert sought me out early on when I became the CEO of the WFCA and said, we got to do this together. How do we work together to make this happen? The Floor Covering Education Foundation really was the goal of Robert and I and others to get the entire industry to embrace the challenge. We've talked about this thing for 50 years, and we just feel like somebody has to step up and say we're going to own it. And so the executive committee of the WFCA decided they would be the ones to make that initial launch, and they committed $1 million of money from the WFCA to help get this on board. And then we went around to several other major players in the industry, Shaw, Mohawk, Engineered Floors, all of them committing money as well, giving us a good foundation from which to get started, and also sending a message to the rest of the industry that WFCA is not in this alone, and that we all realize that not only is it an industry-wide problem, but it will require an industry-wide solution.
Yeah. Wow, and thank you for that. And it definitely is, like you said. I think just the fact of who your, I guess, would you call it founding members, maybe, who those names are, definitely gives credibility to the fact that this problem is real. So, Robert or Geoff, anything you guys want to share about the FCEF from your point of view before we?
Well, we're
jump
both
into
involved with it. I mean, both Robert and I are on the board, and it's the right thing to do at the right time. I mean, we've come a long way and really not done a whole lot to address this situation. So it's great that we've got this united front, which was really started and built up by WFCA. So we're excited. There's a lot to do, but we'll do it.
Yeah, for sure.
And I think too, what's unique about the FCEF is it gave, because we as, CFI, we have been trying to get, and we've gotten great support from different manufacturers over the years, but it was a little hard sometimes getting to, the big guys, the Shaws and Mohawks and so forth. And I think having the FCEF and the WFCA stepping up and taking this initiative, it really allowed them a place that they could kind of combine their efforts and their strengths and get involved. And that's what we've really seen over the last year with this. So it's been phenomenal.
Yeah. And it really does take all of those touch points all the way from the beginning to the end of that process to really bring it together and see this type of a program through. So it's exciting to have all of you be a part of it. And thank you guys definitely for what you're doing. I know we appreciate it as well. So so on that note, let's talk a little bit about the process of what that looks like. So we talked today about how we're going to discuss recruiting, training, and retaining installers, and you guys are all such valuable assets for each of those. But let's start with the recruiting process and what that looks like and what we can do to help. So Scott, do you mind kind of kicking us off and letting us know what that looks like?
No, happy to. And in fact, I would tell you it probably starts a little bit before recruiting. I think there's an initial step that ties in directly to recruiting, and that is promoting the trade. And we as an industry have done a horrible job of telling the story of why this trade is a viable option. If you look at the latest statistics, I think say 60 to 70% of people work outside of the major that they acquired in college, and I'm one of those. I'm a vocal performance major, so here I am in this capacity. But we push people toward a 4-year degree, and what they get from that oftentimes is just student debt.
Yeah.
And so we've got to get to them earlier and begin to tell the story. And I've always said, if you're not telling your story, the person who's telling it, you're probably not going to like it as well. And so as an industry, we've got to begin to tell why this trade is a viable option, how you can go into it. You can learn the trade in a shorter amount of time. You can go to work immediately. You can have your own crews working for you over a short period of time and be a boss. You can manage your own business. Many of the people who are in retail today started as professional installers. And so there are so many options, but we've done a really bad job of communicating how that works. So Seth, in short, or an add-on to that, we're going to recruit everywhere we can, in every way we can. But we're starting in high schools, and we're starting at a younger age. In fact, Robert will talk to you about a program that we have here with the Whitfield County Schools, but we're going to begin reaching them in their sophomore and junior years and begin to let them know there is an option outside of going and getting a 4-year degree. And I don't know about you, but I use professional tradesmen all the time. And we've got to let people know that that's a viable option, and it's an okay option, and you should be proud if you're in one of those trades.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you stated it very well, that recruiting actually starts before that, which is advertising and letting people know that this industry even exists. I know before I got into flooring, everywhere you go has a floor, but you don't really think about I wonder how that happens. When I did get into flooring about 5 years ago, I heard from everyone starting all the way till now, once you get in, you never get out. So
that's correct.
It is a great career, but we definitely do need to tell that story. So I think you just mentioned it. Robert, do you mind telling us a little bit about that program you've got?
Well, I tell you, first I want to play off of what you just said. It's amazing what a disconnect there is with floor covering. Mm-hmm. And I'll give you a perfect example. And we found this as we've done so many programs with the high school kids over the last few years. But one of them we did was called Build My Future Flooring Edition. And we took a big convention center. We filled it full of training modules. We invited these high school kids that basically ended up being a field trip for them for the day. So here we had 100 plus high school kids in this auditorium. And I gave just a little speech. And we talked about, how, for some reason we find that there's a disconnect that, they hear about a plumber, they hear about an electrician, but they never really think of flooring as a trade. And sure enough, after we started the event later that day, even one of the teachers came up to me and she goes, Robert, I never really thought of it. You're right. I never really thought that there was actually a trade where someone could make a good living installing the floors. For some reason, there's just this big disconnect there. But yeah, there's, when you talk recruiting too, we have actually partnered with several groups over the last few years, one of which is actually a Goodwill program. When you think of Goodwill, at least myself, I had always thought of, some place where I can take something I don't need anymore, and maybe they can repurpose it and use it and sell it and whatever. But it turns out they're a phenomenal organization with one heck of a recruiting arm. We actually have partnered with them. They just opened up a school. In fact, as we speak this week, it is actually the first week of a 6-week class at that school in Augusta that was actually set up with a partnership with Goodwill. So they do a phenomenal job there, as also Scott had mentioned. We're working with various high schools, one of which right there in Georgia, of course, the flooring capital of the world, Whitfield County. And we're looking at initiating programs there so that we can catch these kids at an early age and let them know that it is a viable alternative to college or something like this. And, you take Geoff. Geoff, of course, he's the end game. He's got all these contractors that we need to be able to take these individuals, get them recruited, get them trained, and hand them off to his contractors.
Yep.
That's perfect.
Well, and I would add to that, the commercial world is you need certified installers because, you're in a hospital and an acute care unit or something like that. It's a whole different set of rules and principles and things you have to know what to do. And from a recruiting perspective, it takes a while to learn that trade. But I want to add to what Scott said earlier. When I was younger, there were VOTEC schools everywhere, and you had the opportunity either to go to college or do a vocation instead. And we're working. One of our members in Virginia, Ross Cherry, is working with a local community college called Tidewater. And Tidewater Community College, if you look at their website, you can go for like a 2-year associate's degree, or you can click on I want to do HVAC. We're going to add flooring to it. So, we've been working with Robert Varden and CFI on this to put a program together for them, which, Robert, if you remember, it started out as a 6-week program. They're like, we didn't want to do a 6-week program. And now we've gotten it down to a 2-week program. And the idea is to get people interested in that trade. And then if they get interested, then they can take it to the next level. But things like that we're going to do in local markets, and we look at this as a beta. If this is really successful, and Robert, I know you'll agree, then we have other members in the Fuse network that could launch that in their various areas because a lot of schools are looking to do more trade work like that.
Right.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
It's exciting.
Well, and I think that to all of that point, which is why we actually called today's episode Finding Tomorrow's Heroes, because as you mentioned earlier, Geoff, the importance of having not just an installer, but a qualified installer, right? Someone who knows how to do the job and does the job right is so important in really in every installation, but you mentioned especially in the commercial world because there's a lot higher dollar value involved there. But really, installers are kind of one of the unsung heroes of our industry. We don't always. Sorry, go ahead.
I'm sorry, Seth. So what I was going to add is look how the industry has changed. And I'm going to talk commercially for a second. And I know we have residential and commercial. But when I started in this industry almost 40 years ago, I know I look really young, but I'm much older than I was.
I was going to say that.
Back then it was carpet and VCT pretty much. And now you look at what we've got. We've got rubber, we've got vinyl, we've got sheet vinyl, we've got carpet tile. We have cork. I ceramic tile. I could go down the list. Mm-hmm. Well, imagine as a contractor, and I will also back up for a second and say in the old days, you had a tile contractor and you had a flooring contractor. Well, today, a general contractor wants the contractor to do all of it. So now we have to supply installers that can deal with subfloor issues, because when you use hard surface as an example, it's not as forgiving on moisture as like carpet would be. Carpet breathes a lot easier than obviously hard surface doesn't at all. So our need for qualified installers has gone up exponentially as the jobs have become a lot more complicated.
Yeah, that's a great point. And I think along that point leads us directly into kind of our next section here, which is training. So once we've recruited somebody, once we've told the story, I guess we'll back up and start there. That was a great point. So once we've told someone the industry exists, and now we've recruited them, now how do we train them? Before I do hand that over, though, I do want to remind you can text your questions in at any time. This is obviously live, so we want to take your questions. We want to answer that. We've got amazing guests here today on the line that will handle any questions you have. So please text those in. You can see the number at the bottom of your screen. But let's dive into training. And Robert, I think you're the right person to kick that section off for us. So when we recruit an installer, I hope so. When an installer is recruited, what are their resources? What's the best ways for them to get the training they need so that they can then go and work on some of Geoff's projects?
Well, obviously I'll mention CFI. But one thing I love about your program, Seth, is it's not biased. We try to let all our viewers know about every option, any segment we've done. So obviously CFI, we train and certify in every category. Yes, we've had to get into heavily limited recruiting. We've got schools in Forney and Detroit. We're opening up a new one in Tucson. We do a lot of partnerships, like the one with Goodwill and the one with the Votech School and with Tidewater. So we really do a lot of training in a lot of different areas. But one thing I've said from the beginning, at least I'm sure you've heard it, is that really CFI's goal is to train and educate and let them go anywhere in the industry that they might feel they belong, whether it's an independent contractor, whether it's an employee for a retailer, whether it's going off and joining one of the unions and becoming, working for the contractor, a Fuse. But, so that's what CFI is. But there's other phenomenal organizations out there that have tried and true training programs. NWFA, for instance. If there's an individual, and that's the National Wood Floor Covering Association, Michael and Anita and Brett's group over there, if somebody is just focused on wood, they want to learn the science of wood, sand and finish, things like that, then by all means, NWFA, that's where the place to go. Phenomenal organization. Let's say you've got another guy and he's an artist with tile, the large format, all the new commercial stuff. There's Bart Bedica's group over there, the NTCA, and their training arm there is called the CTEF, the Ceramic Tile Education Foundation. Again, all of those are groups that have tried and true phenomenal training programs that anyone who's looking at getting into the industry. And one thing we can't discount either, Seth, is the unions. And I don't want, I think union, if you go back 40 years ago, might have somehow been a dirty word. But, you look at groups like Install. Install, of course, is the floor covering segment of the Carpenters Union. And, John McGrath over there has done a phenomenal job with really, kind of bringing Install to light, with the industry as a whole. But, there's another group, too, called the IUPAT, which is the International Union of the Painters and Allied Trades. And again, a phenomenal organization. I mean, those guys have like 102 training centers up in, just in North America, another, I think, 9 up in Canada. I mean, they've got like 500 instructors. You don't hear much about them. But again, a phenomenal training organization. And, many of these groups, even through stuff like this, if you tie everything together, which you started with the FCEF, its purpose is to fund training, fund scholarshiping, fund training for students to be able to go through these programs at little to no cost. And then we turn around and we give them over to Geoff and we put them to work, and there's a phenomenal living for these guys to make. Yeah,
absolutely. And I think there's a lot of great resources there. And to the point that you made, we obviously want to tell every story that we can about ways to get involved. We don't want to play favorites for sure, because there are so many good resources. So I guess Scott, Geoff, do you guys have thoughts on training
Well, the other thing I would add, if you don't mind me going in front of you, Scott, is
No, fine.
the manufacturers have training, and their training is also excellent. And they have products. Some are more difficult to install than others, but the programs they offer to us, as an example, generally at no charge, are excellent, and that helps make our people better, makes them feel good because they know that our installers have been certified to handle their products, and we can produce a good job at the end of it. And the one thing I always take away from this, and I've been out on thousands of job sites, I know Robert, you have too, is installation's not a science, it's an art. It's one of the most creative professions there is. In some of the jobs, and you've seen awards go out on projects that some of the big design firms have done, for an example, and you look at what the floor is and the statement the floor makes, whether it's a hospital or a school or an office. It's amazing today with the materials available and with the quality of installation talent, what you can produce. And I've walked into jobs, I'm like, oh my gosh, this is a frightening looking building. And then I go back a week or two later and I cannot believe how the floor transformed that area into something that's just magnificent. It's fun, really fun.
Yeah, I've always said, Geoff, that it's basically the paints and the canvas. But until an artisan comes in and puts them together, they're just there. And we've really demeaned that part of the job. I mean, the reality is people know $99 whole house install or free install. That really doesn't appeal to somebody to go into a trade like this. But when they understand that it's a respected trade that gives you a viable option to independence much earlier than many other trades that are out there. I mean, Robert Varden's a great example. Robert has spent his entire life in installation and yet has succeeded and has made a very good life for himself. We've got to do a better job of telling that story. Seth, let me add to the training aspect of this. One of the things we need to make very clear is the FCEF is not training. We don't need to. As Geoff said and Robert said, there are great training organizations out there. We're simply linking the people that have been recruited in to these great training organizations and then providing resources so that financial is not a deterrent to them entering this trade.
Yeah, well, which is still such a huge part of that whole process. So if there's no one to connect the dots, then no one knows they exist. So, it's definitely needed. On the topic of training, let's talk a little bit about the importance, and I won't say necessarily horror stories of what's gone wrong, but let's talk about the importance of having qualified installers. We mentioned that a little bit earlier, but what does that look like in the real world to have someone who's, and I heard the term earlier, artisan, right? That's almost a lost word now. Whereas, even 50 years ago, 100 years ago, people really did put pride into their work, and they did the best job they could, and sometimes it's just, nowadays it feels like it's about getting that square yard of carpet laid. Mm-hmm. So let's talk about qualified installers and what that term even means, and obviously, Robert, some of the resources that you've mentioned, but how do they get there? How does someone become qualified?
Well, just about every one of those programs and the entities that I mentioned have not only training but the certification programs. We are actually starting to see more and more. We get calls all the time where there's, jobs and it's actually been written into the specifications that they have to be certified at some level. Because if you take the industry, especially over the last 10 years, Seth, as the lack of installers continue to get worse and worse and worse, you have many guys out there that are now installing for individuals or groups or companies, and they've had no training, no formal training, no certifications whatsoever. And of course, the industry's been having to deal with that and pay the price, which is tremendous for that type of work. But unfortunately, I talk to retailers right now that call me and they say they're backed up as much as 90 days because of the fact that they don't have the installation crews that they need to get the work. So what happens is they get desperate. They send a crew out there that really shouldn't be sending out there. And I've had even dealers come to me and say, I know it. He goes, I'm sending guys out to do jobs today. I'd have never sent a crew like that out 2 years ago, 3 years ago. But right now I'm so backed up, I don't have a choice. And that's a shame. That's a place to be.
Yeah, for sure. So what does that process look like? I know. Let's say I want to become a doctor, right? And I've got to go to high school and then college and then med school, and then if I want to specialize, I've got to go through that. So what does that path look like? And really, any of you can answer, but what does that path look like for an installer, and what kind of time are we talking about? Are we talking a 4-year degree? Are we talking, 18 years like becoming a neurosurgeon, or are we talking, a 2-week program and you're out the door?
Well, depending on where they want to be, but I'll just give you an example. We have a 5-week and a 6-week program on residential carpet and one on commercial carpet. And when a guy leaves that program, it is very hands-on. That's the one that we just started in Goodwill. That's a residential carpet program. That is a 5-week program. And I got to tell you, I get installers that have been doing this for years. And what we've kind of equated it to, and I'll tell you what we used to give you an idea of why, is, we've been certifying guys for years. In order to receive an R1 certification or a C1 certification, you've got to have at least a minimum of 2 years experience. So obviously we've seen a lot of guys come through and go in for certification at that 2-year plus level. These guys get out of our 5-week carpet program. It is absolutely amazing what they can do. I usually will put them right there at that 2-year plus level. And those guys are walking out of there and will go into work for retailers or dealers or, workrooms and making 35, 40, 45,000 a year.
Yeah.
I mean, so after 6 weeks of training.
Yeah.
And in
That's
many
incredible.
cases, with groups like FCEF and so forth, a lot of that they can get paid for.
Yeah.
True.
So
The other thing that I would add about all this is it's kind of like when we all graduated from school. When I came out of college, I had a marketing degree. I went to work for Armstrong. They said, "You're a carpet guy," which I found out later was probably a negative, not a positive. and I learned from experience from that point on. I mean, I had a certain background. I mean, training's no different. You understand how to put the product together. You understand how to put it on the floor. But until you're on a specific job site with specific conditions, whatever they may be, you're going to learn as you go. So a lot of our members' success with new people is having the right lead installer, having people there that can help bring up those underneath them. And because at the end of the day, we all know in life, a lot of it is experience. And these guys get a lot of on-the-job training. They've got enough to understand what to do. They know the basics. They know what Schluter is, and they understand how to make cuts and things like that. But it's that on-the-job training. And I think many of our members do a good job of having the right supervision on that job to get these young people up and running. And I agree with everything that's been said. They can make a very good living. Installers that are professional, on time, do a great job in the commercial world we treat them like gold. I mean, at the end of the day, we can have the best company and the best salespeople and the best project managers, but if we're not delivering a good finished product, not only for the end user, but for the supplier, we've done a real disservice. So, we have to be focused on that training element. And a lot of it for us takes place on the job site.
Yes, that's so true, Seth. I mean, if you look at this occupation, we often differentiate installation professional artisans, craftsmen, craftswomen from the actual person that sells the product. But to the end consumer, they see them as one. And so the last reflection of the organization who sold the product is the person who puts it in.
Yep.
And so they've got to be trained in professionalism. They've got to be trained, obviously, in the hand skills that are necessary. They need to be trained in business. They need to understand how to financially control their cost and what their output and their input is. And all of those are things that we're passionate about as part of the FCEF.
Yeah, absolutely. And even something you said there about the professionalism, especially in a time like this year, through a pandemic, and who are you going to let in your house to do to do work, and do you want the guy who's going to put the gloves and the boots, boot covers on and clean his work area, or the guy who just runs in and runs out? So yeah, definitely an important part, which kind of leads us to, and you guys are talking about in such a short time, and really, I mean, I won't say minimal training, but very limited training time schedule, you can make a very decent living. I think that's a story, to Scott's point earlier, that we don't really tell as an industry out the gate. But then that's part of retaining, right? So once we've got you and we've trained you, now how do we keep you? How do we keep someone in the industry that is a good installer? So what kind of advice would you guys give to dealers or distributors or contractors that find good installers, how do we keep them?
I'll take that on first if you guys don't mind.
Yeah, please.
Sure.
I mean, from our perspective, the way you keep people is the way you treat them. And number one, you can't underpay them. You got to make sure they're making a fair living, and you've got to consider what your competitors are paying as well. I mean, that's part of the process. But if your culture is such where you're paying them a good living, you're helping them get better at their trade skill. I mean, that's another really important thing. I think it's the little things you can do. Like a lot of our members, like this time of the year for the holidays, will do a luncheon and they'll bring in all their installers, to thank them for the job that they've done. And they have incentives during the year. And a lot of it is just a pat on the back and, wow, I know this was a tough job. You guys did an amazing thing here. But the companies that have a culture in our business of family and treating really all their employees like family do the best job of retaining their people.
Yeah, which is definitely a great point. I'm definitely glad to hear that concept, because there's so many companies that don't necessarily think employee first or think family first or think that something as small as what you just said, a dinner or a gift card or something, can make a difference. But that's definitely something that people need to keep in mind. Robert or Scott, any kind of tips on how to keep people in the industry?
Yeah, I'd add on to what Geoff said. Typically, the way you treat your craftsman is the way that they'll treat their customer. And so it's so important. People look for ways to do business with people that are loyal to them. And so when you treat your people right, as Geoff has said, they will find a way to be loyal. It becomes about more than a paycheck. It becomes more about a family, being a part of the success of the organization. And so it is so much about the golden rule, treating other people the way that you want to be treated, or the platinum rule, treating other people the way that they choose to be treated. And it's common sense. Unfortunately, it's just not common practice.
Yeah, that's very true.
And I'm just going to add to what both of them said, Seth. I can't tell you, all of my guys, when I ran my shop, I mean, they all were employees. They all worked for me by the hour. But we did summer picnics, we did holiday breakfasts, we did holiday dinners. I mean, it included everybody. And I think that's the biggest key, is if you treat them as a cost of doing business, then they're going to be just that, and they're going to look at where else they can do business. But if you treat them like they are a partner and you truly make them feel that way. I mean, I knew all of my installers' wives, their kids, their birthdays. I mean, and again, it doesn't take much, but it's a culture and it's an environment. You can't fake that. So for those companies that are very successful, like Geoff said, you can tell it's the environment that they create, and they don't have to worry about losing their installers. I mean, my guys, I used to tell somebody, if somebody else tried to recruit my installer and he told his wife would say, "Oh no, you're not leaving." If you take care of them, they will take care of you, and that's the relationship you build, and you'll retain them that way.
Yeah,
it's a simple leadership principle, but if your loyalty is to somebody as an employee, then they will become loyal to your business. If your loyalty is to an individual, they will become loyal to you. It's much harder to leave a person than it is to leave an entity. And so you want to build the relationship around the individual and invest in them. And as Geoff said, training is a vital part of that. The more you're training them, the more you're offering the ability for them to get better at the trade, the more loyal they become to you, because you have invested in them in a way that is far beyond a paycheck.
Yep, that's very true.
And to add to that too, Scott, it's a perfect example, because I can remember even as I got in this trade and was doing it, there for years, I thought of leaving it. I was going to go sell real estate or do something. But the better I got at my craft, the more I looked back at what I did and said, wow, the more interest I got in it, the more passion I got for it. So if you're training those people, the better they get, the more they're going to enjoy what they do, the more they enjoy looking back at what they just did.
Yeah. Well, and I think also that the other piece is taking it all the way back, because if you have that person that is invested in the industry and is being treated right by management, or is their own manager, and is treating their employees right, they're going to start the process all over again, and they're going to help with recruiting. They're going to help with finding people, because we all tend to hang out with people that are similar to us, right?
That's correct.
Right.
Or as the saying goes, we're the sum total of the 5 people we spend the most time with.
Yeah.
So I need to spend more time with you guys, I guess. But really, that is one of the greatest recruiting tools that we probably have in our industry too, is happy, successful installers like Robert. So, but any other kind of last thoughts on recruiting, training, retaining, and we will get to your questions. If we can put that number back up, we will get to your questions at the end. But
Seth, I'll just say that your blessing is also your curse in this. So for so long as an industry, we've replaced retiring installers with helpers that were nephews, cousins, other family members, and they migrated up. When we went through recessionary periods, what happened is you didn't only lose the installer because there was no work to be done, but you lost the helper that was coming up with them. So we lost multiple generations. There is no doubt the best advertising, the best job board you have is a satisfied craftsman. And they're going out and talking about it and bragging about it and showing pictures of the work that they've done, and people going, wow, I don't feel that way about my job. I want to be involved in that, or talking about the success that they've had. That's the advertisement we need to create, and we've got to do a better job of promoting that. I remember back to, as I said, last year, December 12th, we had a young man by the name of Marquise Wright come in and was part of that announcement. And Marquise is in Jacksonville, Florida, and just a phenomenal guy who has 5 different family members that are working with him. He is an example of a young person who has seen the light. He has seen that this is a viable trade, and it's even more viable if you do it right. And so we're going to take stories like his, and we're going to use them to help market the trade to other people from his generation.
Yeah, and it's those stories for sure.
Speaking of Marquise, talk about one of our small success stories. He was one of the students that went through our 5-week, and now he was one of the first classes here back about 2-3 years ago, and since then he started his own company. And we just did last month. We did a 1-week basic wood LVT class, and not only did Marquise come, but he brought also 3 of his employees to the class and put them through the class as well. So again, just guys like that get in and want to do well and have pride in what they do. The sky's the limit for those guys.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a great point. So let's talk a little bit about, and I know this year has been different. This year has been challenging, and it's probably impacted all of these areas pretty significantly. So Scott, do you mind telling us a little bit about kind of how the FCEF and the WFCA as a whole through COVID, how that's impacted the recruiting process and installers, and then we'll move to you guys, Robert and Geoff.
Yeah, so obviously we're impacted. We continued, probably not at the rate we would have continued before. We've moved forward with these programs that Robert has talked about. Shout out to 2 amazing people, Steve Abernathy, who is the interim director, CFO at the WFCA, but interim director of the FCEF. Steve has done all the background work and the base groundwork to get the FCEF established as a 501c3. And so now all the groundwork is where it needs to be, and we're in the process even this week of interviewing for a full-time director of the FCEF. Hope to have an announcement on that probably the 1st or 2nd week of January. And then Kay Whitener, who is in the field continuing to develop the relationships, representing the FCEF with anything within the industry that allows us to meet together or virtually. And she does a phenomenal job of carrying the message of not only what we're doing through the FCEF, but why it is so important. And she's developing relationships with guidance counselors at the high school level, with trade schools, and everyone across the board. So thankful to those guys. There has been a lot going on, but probably not as visible as it would have been otherwise. The inability to meet face-to-face has hurt us. Obviously, we were doing some things in Washington, D.C. around apprenticeships. Those meetings were not able to take place, and though you can do them by Zoom, there's so much of more of a creativeness that takes place when you're face-to-face in a room. Somebody says something, you build off that idea, and you go from there. So we've missed that aspect of it, but I can tell you the FCF is in a very solid position, and 2021 is going to be an amazing year for us as we begin to own the fact that there will be a solution to the installation crisis.
Yeah, and speaking of that solution, what can our viewers do? What can we all do? But let's talk directly to those that are tuned in today. What can we do to be a part of the solution?
Well, there are numerous ways that you can help be a part of the solution with FCEF. One of those is to join your voice with the voices of the WFCA. The WFCA's membership has gone from about 1,000, 1,100 January 1st to over 10,000 today, as people have begun to understand the need to be part of a greater entity in dealing with an issue like this. Certainly what was happening with COVID and our ability to communicate during that time helped as well. But you being a part of that and putting your voice behind it and saying we want to be part of the solution is important. Giving financially is important, being willing to do that, challenging others within the industry to give financially. If you look right in front of me, you'll see this product called AeroPure. This is from Aeropol, the company. Ralph Bowe, a dear friend and highly respected within the industry, had the idea of not only helping the industry during the COVID crisis, but also helping people. And so this is a hand sanitizer that 10% of everything that is sold of this product goes back to the WFCA and immediately through to the FCEF.
Wow.
And we would like for other organizations to look at what they could do to be creative. Not surprised at all that Ralph Bowe, and with his background in this industry, was the first to think about this, but he's not the only to think about it. Paul Murphin and I met very early on, and he started thinking about ways that Taylor could help the WFCA by helping the Floor Covering Education Foundation. This is a phenomenal way to help. Everybody can do something. And so if it's using your voice, if it's using your pocketbook, whatever it may be, but don't be part of the people that are out there complaining about the crisis if you're not willing to be part of the solution as well.
Absolutely. And thank you for showing that. I mean, sometimes the solution is as simple as buying hand sanitizer, right?
Yeah.
So there's a lot of ways to get involved. Geoff and Robert, what are you guys' thoughts on being part of the solution?
Go ahead, Geoff.
I think we're the problem. No, I'm kidding. So, I'm just going to go on with what Scott had said. It's getting the word out, what FCEF can do. I mean, certainly, funding is important. I think giving our people direction, when I say people, our members direction on how they can go about recruiting in their own markets. And that's why personally I'm excited about this Tidewater Community College project. And then some of the things that Robert's working on with Goodwill, et cetera. So we've just got to build on what we've got. I will say this year, if you look at the business, the residential business has been booming. The commercial business, not so much. And although we feel very confident that'll start to pick up next year. So our squeeze on installation has gone down a bit because we haven't had the demand. And where we've seen it most, quite frankly, is in the tile segment. I mean, we seem to see the biggest shortages in really good tile installers. So I think as we come out of this commercially and the business starts to pick up, you're going to see more focus from organizations like ours. Although it's important to say, we need to be on this now, even with the business being slow, because at some point it's all going to catch up to itself.
Yeah. And now, while it's slow, is the perfect time to get additional training, the perfect time to recruit, the perfect time to set up for that backlog of work that's pending. So,
and I would add, Seth, a lot of our preferred suppliers have been doing more training because they recognize now's the time to do it, and our members have been very receptive to that.
Yeah, that's awesome to hear. And Robert,
with us, with us, Seth, of course, when the pandemic started, we had a lot of hands-on things that had to cancel because obviously they were, hands-on training with multiple guys in the same room. But one thing we did see is that, like I said, we saw so many of the people come to the table that realized, okay, we're having this lull, like Geoff had just mentioned, but we know that when it comes back, not only is it going to come back with a vengeance, but we're also going to have lost more individuals during that time frame of 2020 because of the age of most of those installers. And we saw that as a group as we were communicating with our members. We saw some of the ones that had been contemplating retiring over the last few years just decide, okay, it's time. And one thing that I think when you say your viewers, depending on who your viewers are, I know one of the things that we're running into right now because of so many new programs, the Goodwill, for instance, and I don't know if people understand sometimes when you are hands-on training individuals, to do installation, the tools, the materials that it takes to do that training. I mean, when we've got guys working in a module, they pretty much almost all have to have their own set of tools. So they're all utilizing, if it's carpet, it's a knee kick with tools. And so, we had to put together a crate full of tools because we've had such great, we've been blessed with so many vendors that have given us tools over the years to train with. But suddenly now I find I'm sending some over to Augusta for that training center, up to Detroit to that training center. I got an email from Brian Cooksey, who's overseeing the program with Whitfield County High School, and he too is like, so where can we maybe get some of the power stretchers and the knee kickers and the tools needed? And I'm looking at all the various programs and thinking, wow, we don't have them in-house. So yeah, some of your distributors, your manufacturers, even if it's not money they're giving right now with so many new training programs that, we are blessed to have kicking off, we're going to need help kicking those off. And it's going to be more than just financial contributions, but we're going to need tools, we're going to need supplies, we're going to need cushion, we're going to need materials. And any of you viewers that have access to that, sometimes even if it's a retailer, a lot of times we get a lot of material from retailers that just have all this old stock been sitting in their warehouse and they'd love to clear it out. So we send a truck and we take it, and it's great for training. So anything like that your viewers could help with would be tremendously helpful.
Seth, I'll add to that don't just look to the FCEF to be the solution, but come to us with your solutions. Be actively involved in this. If you're waiting for us to communicate the next thing and you're going to tag into that, you might miss something. John Staff is a great example. John is a dear friend, a retailer in Springfield, Illinois, and John said, here's what I'm going to do. And he met with Shaw Industries, he's part of the Shaw Flooring Network, and they worked together for him to go out and find a couple of people that he's willing to bring in as interns. And he would start the process. In other words, he would vet them to make sure they're good candidates. And then working with Shaw, they would come in and work on some of the business part, the professionalism, the financial acumen, and then they brought CFI in to do the hands-on training. So it's an industry-wide initiative started by one person who had the insight to say, those other programs may be for large metropolitan areas. He said, but we need a program that can work in smaller areas. And he said, I want to go and find the people, get them trained, and then I want to own them. In the bigger programs in big metropolitan areas, we're going to put them through training, and then everybody will be coming in trying to get that person to work for them. But when you go out and find them from the start, here's an example of a person who didn't take our model, created his own model, and we find that as a viable option that we can roll out nationwide.
Yeah, which is awesome. Don't wait around to figure out how to help things that are already there. Be creative. There's a bunch of solutions that you can help even start yourself.
So true.
So, yeah, that's a great way to put that. We do have a lot of questions coming in, so let's get some of those answered. And again, if you have a question, feel free to text it to the number at the bottom of the screen. And we'll just start going through some of these. So question number one is, what is the name of the organization that funds training?
It's the Floor Covering Education Foundation.
Yep.
Floor Covering Education Foundation, made up of manufacturers, distributors, suppliers, definitely installers, retailers. All of those are represented on the board of directors. So we can show this is an entire industry effort to focus on solving this plight, this crisis that we're dealing with.
Okay. The next question, Robert, I'll send your way. It's does or will CFI collaborate with IUPAT?
Oh, absolutely. We collaborate with them tremendously. We are actually looking at doing a program. We're going to go in and do certification with their journeyman, where they could actually end up being CFI certified. We have some very unique programs that we are working with those guys, and I personally and CFI, we've had a long-standing relationship with those guys for several years. And again, I think they've kind of been this silent group that has been doing so much. But a lot of times I'll ask somebody if they've heard of IUPAT, and they're like, "Who?" And I explain to them who they are and what a phenomenal group they are. And I think we're going to be seeing and hearing more and more from those guys, because they're a real phenomenal group to work with.
Okay, great to know.
And one thing I'll add is I know you kind of gave a little line when I mentioned those groups. My information is out there. If anybody needs any information on any of them, whether it's NWFA, CTEF, install, I'd be more than happy to share their contact information, get them in contact with them, so they can feel free to even call the CFI office, and I can get that information to them.
Wow, that's a very
Because we're all
generous
about
offer.
supporting people.
Yeah. Well, very good. And we'll put some of these back up on the screen. But the next question is, what can the average installer expect to earn annually? Might be a little bit of a tricky question, but if you can ballpark it.
And I'll let maybe Geoff hit this too, but what we have found in the industry as a whole, and this is actually what I think gives part of it the bad name, is if you took, and I don't mean this to sound negative to installers, because I am an installer, always have been, but if you take the bulk mass of the thousands of installers that are out there, those that do it right, have pride in what they do, like Geoff said, they show up on time, they do what they're going to do, those guys are making really good money. Unfortunately, there is a very large portion of the guys that I will call installers that don't really care. They're into it for a job, they're into it for a paycheck, and frankly, they give the other guys a bad name and actually take away a lot of the credibility from the trade itself. And I hate to say that, but it's just a reality. And I think any of the professional guys out there would be the first ones to admit that.
Okay. And then another question is, which is better, going to a school or learning to do an apprenticeship? I think that's a...
Yeah, I don't know that that's an either or.
Yeah.
I think that's a both and. I think
Yep.
the apprenticeship can be part of the process, but certainly as a part of that, you have to have professional training. And remember, the FCEF, though, are part of our initial goal. We assume about 80% of the funding we do initially will be for people that have never been in the industry that are coming in. But that's not the only purpose of the FCEF. It's also for those people that have been part of the industry but want to enhance their skills. And so this is about quality professional craftsmen and artisans, and not simply about getting people in to begin the process.
Yeah. Okay. Great.
And Seth, I guess it depends what they meant by that question. If they meant to go to a formal training program versus learn it in the field as an apprentice.
Sure.
Because, like I said, if you take, the IUPT, the install, they have apprenticeship programs, but that's formal training.
Yeah.
But if you're talking just learning in the field versus taking formal training, a guy taking that formal training is going to learn at literally 100 times faster pace than a guy in the field. Because typically what happens when an apprentice in the field, he's running behind a journeyman. The journeyman's not taking the time usually to stop and say, wait a minute, let me show you how to use that wall trimmer. Let me show you how to use that top cutter. And so they're just slowly picking it up.
Right.
As we're going through formal training, they're going to show them that much quicker.
It's really the combination of the two. You got to have both.
It is. And we do on-the-job training in all of our programs.
Yeah, the other thing, Robert, to tie into what you said, the problem with many people that are going out there and learning from someone who's been doing it is the person they're learning from learned from someone who was doing it, who learned from somebody who was doing it. It's like making a copy of a copy of a copy. And so what was great experience and great practice years ago may not be state-of-the-art practice today. And so you really need to be learning at some point from people that are up to date with the latest and greatest techniques, tools, everything that's available, not only to help you do it right, but to help you do it better, help you do it easier with less wear and tear on your body.
Yeah.
Well,
absolutely.
and as I said earlier too, the new products are changing all the time. If you're not continuing to learn and train yourself to keep learning, then suddenly you're going to run across such stuff and you're going to make a mistake and it's going to fail.
Yeah.
Well, the thing you have to remember, we're a capitalist country, so we have competitors, and you've got to have the right training, you've got to have the right tools, you've got to have the right systems in place operationally, because in our business, it's not even just the installation, it's the logistics, getting the product there, acclimating the product, getting the subfloor ready.
True.
So we have to continue to engage and teach, at every level of our businesses to stay competitive. I think back in the commercial business, as recently as 10 years ago, a lot of companies were doing hand takeoffs. Nobody does hand takeoffs anymore. It's all done on your computer. It's digital. Why? It's more accurate and it's faster. And we have the ability to sit with a client and say, okay, so you don't want rubber in that area, you want rubber in this area. We can turn the system on, make the change, print out a new form or a new blueprint, floor plan right away. So we have to stay up on the latest technology, and a lot of that technology is in the installation arena. It's very important.
Well, and Seth, I know we don't talk about Taylor, but that's a perfect example. I mean, there were things that would happen to me in the field 10 years ago that I did not have a solution for, that now you do. Look at Sahara, look at Resolute, Dynamic. There's products now that can do things for me that, had I have not kept up with technology and those new products, I wouldn't know anything about those products.
Great point.
Yeah, that's definitely a great point. So the next question is, are there resources for people who don't live near a school offering flooring certifications? I think the answer to that is we put a lot of those on the screen earlier. So if you can scrub back through, we'll try and put them back up on the screen again. But I think Robert did a great job of talking through those. We've got several. You've got the NWFA, you've got Install, IUPAT, you've got CFI, of course.
CTEF.
And we're, so there, yeah, exactly. There's a lot of those resources. And again,
I would also talk to your key supplier. If you're nowhere near a school, talk to your suppliers. A lot of times they'll bring the training to you.
That's true.
Yeah, because that's one thing that I did, and I'm glad, Geoff, glad you brought it up, was, manufacturers. You look at Shernox, you look at Mapei. I mean, all these manufacturers have some great, training. And yes, it's on their products, but typically that's going to be because if you look at all the training programs, whether it's Install, IUPAT, CFI, what we teach is manufacturers' relations on how to install those products, whether it's Mohawk, Jaws. So obviously those manufacturers know their products well. They certainly know how to apply them. And yeah, some of those guys have some phenomenal training.
Yep.
Awesome. Okay, so then the next question is, does CFI offer job placement after training?
Well, we in-house, we don't offer it. But the bottom line is, we'll have a graduating class that are leaving our school. Most of the time, all those students already have a place to go before we get them. But it's amazing because we've got such a phenomenal social media presence that what happens is, we'll always post our graduating class, and then our Facebook gets hit with retailers and dealers all over the country. Hey, any of those guys want to move to Florida? Hey, any of those guys? And so if we ever had a guy that needed place, trust me, we'd have a dozen places we could place him, just depending on what he wanted to do and where he wanted to go.
Yeah, and I'm sure that's the case with all the training organizations too. And that's where FCEF can kind of help, where Robert leaves off right there. If you have someone who isn't placed, then we didn't have an FCEF before to help with placement, but now you will have that.
Yeah. All right, we'll take a few more questions here. This one says, when training installers, do you pay them for work time as well as paying for the training? So I'm not sure who the you is, but you want to handle that one, Robert? How is that typically?
It kind of depends on the program they're going through.
Okay.
A lot of times, like I said, a lot of the students that come to us were already hired by a retailer or dealer, and he's actually paying them to go to the training and paying for the training. Also, for instance, like we mentioned IUPAT, they've got apprenticeship programs where they can set you up with contractors, and you're actually being paid while you're still going through the training program. So yeah, there's a lot of different avenues of doing that. And I think kind of like the Goodwill program, that program that we just launched this week, CFI was actually involved in that vetting process. So we were doing Zoom calls with all the students because this class only takes 8. It's a very hands-on, very focused class. So of those 8 individuals that they had recruited, there was a vetting process to see which 8 were actually going to be able to kind of sort of win that scholarship, so to speak, because they weren't paying for it. And they too already have internships set up for when they're done with that class.
Yeah. So another question, and I'm not sure we'll have an answer, but I'm going to throw it out there. It says, any thoughts on how installers can get health care at a group rate similar to what the mills provide?
Wow.
I would take that. I mean, it depends a lot on the company. I mean, some of our member companies offer it. And then you have to remember, too, in the industry, you have in-house employees for installation, and a lot of people are subcontracting the work to these various companies that we talked about earlier who want to be in business for themselves. So I don't know how we could band together to get some kind of program together for installers on a bigger basis. A lot of it is handled locally.
Okay.
Yeah, I would say your chance for that is much greater if you're employed, if you're an employee of the company versus being a subcontractor. But we're always looking at ways that we can benefit people within the industry, and especially the installation side. So it's something the WSCA will constantly be looking for, is a way that we can band together from a healthcare standpoint. There may be some other organizations that already offer that. It seems to me NWFA may have offered something healthcare related. So, look at these organizations whose information is being put in front of you, reach out to them and see if they have that. You may be able to band together with a group that's already there. Yeah,
absolutely. This next question was actually written in specifically for Robert, and we already answered the first half of it, which was about does CFI offer job placement opportunities? But the second half of it, Robert, if you could touch on it, says, if so, who could they contact at CFI to let them know their company has work and need of installers?
They can just certainly contact our office. John McHale will probably be the one to pick up that call. One thing that we actually just started on because like I said, our social media has a phenomenal presence. We finally just started here last month letting some companies post when they need installers, kind of giving a sense of, who's looking for what. Also let installers post if, maybe they're relocating to a different area and wanting work when they get there. We can certainly help them set that up. But feel free to contact myself, John, contact the office there. It's an easy number to get. Look us up, cfiinstallers.org. We'll certainly help you out any way we can, and we take those calls all the time.
And Seth, let me add to that I talked about WFCA membership a moment ago, but certainly if you want your installer's voice to be amplified, being a member of the CFI would be a great way to do that. So they have their own unique individual membership, and so band your voices together. That's how we get things done, not only within the industry, but in Washington, D.C. when we're fighting on your behalf. Is the first question they ask is, how many people do you represent? And so within an entity or the industry like installation, or whether it's the industry as a whole, the more voices we represent, the louder our voice is.
Yeah. And guys, we are a couple of minutes over, but if you don't mind, we've got an all-star cast, so we have quite a few questions. If you have to go, we understand, and here's some ways to connect with us at Taylor. We will take a couple more questions, but feel free to connect with us on our social media. We have a great app that you can download. Sign up for our newsletters. Our next live event will be January 19, I believe, is the third Tuesday, and we'll have a live event then. So feel free to join in there. If you have to drop off, we understand, but this is a great forum. So let's keep a couple of these last questions, and then we'll go. So this person asked, is there an email or a place? I guess, can they email someone, or is there a place to go to get all of the industry information? Probably talking about what we're putting on the screen.
Yeah, right now we are developing the website. We actually have the domain name FCEF.org, but that website is not developed yet. So now the best way to do it is through WFCA.org. Go to our website. You'll find the information there related to FCEF, and you'll find the contact information for any of us that you would like to reach, so we can give you additional information. You can certainly call WFCA, and we'll put you in contact with the right party. And again, one of the great things about this initiative that gets me excited is we're not siloing anymore. This is not about what one organization is doing. We found that many of us were spending money on the same thing, and really because we weren't combining our efforts, we weren't making a difference. If you call us and you're trying to reach somebody who is not CFI, we will put you in contact with them. We don't care who the solution is. We care that together as an industry we find a solution. So certainly if you reach out to us, we'll get you to the right party.
Awesome. And the next question is the large labor union flooring installation training, so I guess like install and IUPAT, are those different training programs than non-union like CFI?
Well, Seth, when it comes to training properly is training properly,
Yeah.
And whether it's CFI, whether it's IUPAT, whether it's install, all of us, when it's, let's face it, there's only one way to do it right. There may be several different avenues on how to get there, But in the end, there's only one way to get it done and get it done right. All of them are phenomenal training programs. So what you're being taught is not going to be much different. The way the programs are structured is going to be different in the sense of, with CFI, we have programs for the guy that maybe he's, again, if we're recruiting a young kid in and he just wants to go through a 5-week intense training and go out and go to work, we've got a program. If he wants to get on a program where he maybe goes to work for a contractor somewhere and he goes through those apprenticeship programs with it, be it install or IUPAT, they've got great programs to send those guys through that. So really, as I've always said, I think with every installer, the beauty of this trade is the fact that you can be almost anything you want to be very easily. If you're the kind of guy, you want to be your own boss, you want to be your own independent contractor, you want to start your own business, run your own crews, this has got to be the easiest trade I've ever seen to be able to do that, because that's the way our industry has kind of set this up. But then that's not for everybody. If you want to be the guy, again, that just goes in and works a good day's work and goes home and don't want to worry about it, let it be somebody else's problem, you want to be an employee, there's a million places you can go for that. So again, depending on wherever you want to go, whether you want to go work with a union, with a non-union, with a retailer, commercial, residential, there's so many avenues. If you're the right guy, as I've always said, as Geoff said, sky's the limit. You can make a great living in any one of those directions.
Yeah. And
I would just add, Seth, I mean, the thing about us is there's a lot of trades, and our trade is very technical. I mean, there's no doubt about that, but it's an art at the same time. And I think that separates us from a lot of other things. You see some of these jobs like in a hospital where they took sheet vinyl and they carved patterns into it. I mean, the most intricate and sophisticated work that, is it very technical? Yes, but it's artwork at the end of the day. And I think the satisfaction our people get when they walk off a job, maybe not even one that complex, we don't do a good job of portraying what the finished product can be and what it took to get there. And our really good people, and we have very, very good people, take great pride in that work because their finished product is amazing.
And it's very visual.
Exactly.
That HVAC guy, what does he get to look at? An electrician, what does he get to look at? What does a plumber get to look at? Wow, look how great this toilet flush is.
It's hard.
It is. It makes the biggest, most tremendous, change to any room is the flooring and the walls.
And probably the most permanent change.
Yeah, that's a great point. So I guess I'll throw this question your way, Scott. It says, do you have any written case studies of successful people like Robert or others? And if so, how would they get copies of these?
I don't know that we've done those in a written form. We do have video form of that. We actually went to the CFI convention last year, and we recorded video segments with, I think there were 5 or 6 different people, really not always young, but different ethnicities, different age groups, all telling their story. And we feel like the best way to let people know what's possible is talk to people who have actually made success happen through this. And so we can certainly get you links to those videos so that you can watch and hear those stories and take those stories and promote them, put them out on social media, do whatever you can to help people know there's a viable option that doesn't run up all the debt that a 4, 5, 6 year degree does.
Yeah. Yep. And that ties in perfectly with the next question, which is, how can people get financial assistance to join this industry?
Yeah, so what will happen typically is, first of all, the FCEF vets the training organization. So we make sure that the training organization is offering classes that fall in line with our mission. Obviously, everybody we put here, most of their classes will, because they are the organizations that are already trusted within the industry. But then when they have somebody that comes to that wants to go to class, they come to us and say, we have a person that wants to attend this class, the cost is, and we determine at that point the amount of the scholarship will be allocated to that. In fact, for the Goodwill program that Robert has already mentioned multiple times, we already have done some scholarshiping of students to allow them to go through that program. That became kind of a model to us to see how all of this works. Again, much of that's still being ironed out. We have charters for each of the different committees within the FCEF, but we know that is our purpose, and we did not want to hold up from the opportunity to bring some people in and to fall through the whole process so that we could see as we work at what we needed to tweak. But yeah, you reach out to the training organization reaches out to us, and then we set the scholarshiping process in place.
Awesome, very good. And Robert, I'm going to send this one your way, and I think this is our last question. It says, are there classes for more intricate and artistic installations?
I mean, most all of our classes, we have, what we call a beginner. I say the beginner because they're really not, but we have, our residential and our advanced. And we have that on both, residential and commercial. And then we have some specialty courses. Our specialty stuff is, for instance, we have a woven pattern match class, and we dive deeply into wovens and pattern deviation, bow, skew, pattern elongation, correction methods. I mean, it's an intense 2-day class. But every now and then we just, we'll get something depending on what the group wants, that we kind of, because we have, 40 plus senior trainers that we utilize all over the country. And many of these guys are the artisans that we've talked about here for the last hour. And so depending on what someone was looking to do, if we didn't do it, I would probably know of an organization that did. So they can certainly reach out to me and see what they're looking for, and I'll certainly help them find it.
Yeah, and I would add to that, I mean, we've said this multiple times during our time together today, but I mean, if you're looking for real expertise at the high end of wood, then you would go to NWFA. And if you're looking for that in tile, then you'd go to CTEF. I mean, CFI covers great knowledge, not only at the base level, but on up. But we also realize there are organizations that they specialize in one product category. And I know Robert often refers people that come to him to those other organizations for that level of training.
Yeah.
And I would just add, I mean, we all know what a crazy year this has been. And the partnership we've seen from our suppliers in a year like this has been off the charts.
Yeah.
And I think we all together, with the manufacturer and with our members, and I think this applies to almost any company in the country. I'm not trying to say this is Fuse alone. We've really seen the power of partnership. And like to the question about Robert with sophisticated installation, again, some of the, look how heavy we are now into hard surface and resilient products and sheet products, and then the large format tiles and ceramic tile. These are not easy products to install, and without the training and support of the manufacturers who are promoting those products, we couldn't be successful. So I just, again, want to give a shout out to the manufacturers for all their help they've given, contractors, dealers, retailers across the country this year. I mean, I'm just very proud to be part of an industry that came together like this.
Yeah, very well said.
Yeah, I think we all are. We're definitely blessed too. So thank you guys so much. The last question that I see came in said how much money was raised for the FCEF during today's webinar. I don't know the numbers yet, but it's $20 per viewer. So we are excitedly going to hand that check over. We don't know yet, though.
$1 million.
$1 million. So Jeff's going to send $1 million.
I heard it. It's on tape.
Well, there's a million viewers, right? That's what I figured.
That's right. That's right. But again, if you have hung in here with us through the rest of these questions, thank you so much, Geoff.